facing a ton of conservative backlash as critics like Senator Rand Paul accuse Republicans of only being fiscal conservatives when they're not actually in charge of the government as they are now. But President Trump is touting this as a victory in delivering the military spending boost that he promised as a candidate. The president admits that the spending bill contains much waste, which he blames on Democrats. Joining me now, Congressman Andy Biggs, an Arizona Republican. Congressman, welcome. Good to have you here tonight. What's your take on this thing?
Thank you. Well, I'm more in the Rand Paul, Mike Lee camp. I agree with that. I mean, we actually sent a CR over to a short-term spending bill over at the beginning of the week to the Senate that had full funding for the military, but it kept the other spending at a lower level within the caps. What we did last night and early this morning is blew off those caps, and now we're looking at having a $1.2 trillion structural deficit for this year alone, and that's not good. That's not counting the military funding. So I am just absolutely shocked that my party is now the grand old profligates instead of the grand old party.
You know, some are saying this sort of signals the end of the Tea Party movement. Would you agree?
Well, no, because I think what we may actually see is a re-energizing of the Tea Party movement. When President Trump got elected, the Tea Party kind of began taking it easy. We're good, we're good to go. I think this will re-energize it. I hope it re-energizes it because we have got to get our spending under control. We're at $20.5 trillion in national debt. It's going to balloon up to about 21.5 to 22 by the end of this next fiscal year, this current fiscal year. It's unsustainable.
Well, let me ask you this: how do you think this happened? I mean, there was some reports I read that indicated that President Trump sort of sent the signal that it was okay to allow this to happen because he really wanted the military spending, which is a campaign promise that he made, and that was the priority. And you have to go back and start to deal with whatever cuts you might be able to do down the road. Is that your understanding of how this worked?
Well, I think he sent the signal, but I think he sent the signal after the Senate said, we're not going to change our rules. We're going to still rely on the 60-vote rule. We still have to rely on Democrats. And this could be avoided quite simply if the Senate just said, like we did for Justice Gorsuch, like the Democrats did under Harry Reid. We're going to suspend that 60-vote cloture rule, and we're going to make it 51 votes for short-term spending or a budget bill. If they did that, then you don't need to do all this other rigmarole and jack up the spending to buy the votes, which is really what happens. And then they could have done it at a very low rate for the discretionary spending and fully funded the defense. That's a logical thing to do. Didn't happen. I think the president's saying, look, we have to have the military spending, but we're sure eating a lot of other spending. What do you say to the leadership on the House side? Paul Ryan, I saw speaking about this, the speaker, he said, what are we going to do? Not fund disaster relief for Houston? We're not going to rebuild these cities? Of course we are. What do you say to that? Well, I say, at least put some pay-fors in there. Yeah. If you're going to do that, make sure you can afford to pay for it. This is the 5th CR we've done this year, and the Senate's never even taken up the budget we sent over to them in September. Good grief! The reason that the CRs are so bad is that they've given us we do on average 5 a year for the last 20 years. We've quadrupled our national debt in that same period because we won't simply do an annual budget.
Do you think this? Last question for you, sir. Do you think this hurts Republicans in the midterms?
I think it really can hurt as people see it. It offsets what we did and had so much success with the tax cut deal, where people are feeling that tax cut and they're happy about it. They see the economy growing. This could actually counterbalance that. I'm afraid of it.
We'll see. Yeah. Congressman Biggs, thank you very much. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks.
So this latest budget deal now setting the stage for more intense battles to come, from immigration to deficits. All of this as we just talked about, to the 2018 midterm elections. Here now, Ned Ryan, former White House staffer under President George W. Bush, and Michael Blake, vice chair of the Democratic National Committee. Good to see you both.
Thanks, Martha.
Ned, let me start with you. Just looking at some of the notes that you made about this earlier today, you believe that if the GOP had stuck to its guns, so to speak, on the military side of this, that they could have gotten a deal without all the Democrats spending in it. How so?
Well, no, Congressman Biggs just made this point that the House sent over a bill that did the military funding, but essentially kept the rest of government spending flat. And if Republicans would have stuck to their guns, they would have dared the Democrats to vote against the military, and I think Republicans could have won that fight. I mean, the amazing thing, too, Martha, is I think this is Exhibit A as to why Mitch McConnell should have done away with the legislative filibuster. I have fellow conservatives that say, well, the legislative filibuster prevents bad spending bills. I would argue that's what got us this bad spending bill. And when you think about it, it's either 1.2 or 1.5 trillion that we're adding to the 20.6 trillion in national debt currently. At what point did Republicans decide that they didn't want to address government spending, that they didn't want to shrink government? And I do think it has implications for the midterms, Martha. And the amazing thing to me is Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, I don't think they wanted to have a spending fight because they thought it might endanger their 2018 chances. I actually think by not having a spending fight, they might have called into question some of those key races in 2018. And the other thing that's disappointing that I think this forecast as well, Martha, Republicans have been talking a big game that if you put us back into the majorities in 2019, we'll deal with entitlement reform. I think this is a very clear signal that they absolutely have no intention of dealing with entitlement reform should they get the majorities in 2019.
Could be. Michael Blake, what do you think?
So the response that you just heard is the exact reason why there's such dysfunction in Washington. The repeated comment was fight and fight and fight. What Americans want is that we're going to fight for them, not focusing on political fight. So let's talk about what actually happened here. You had funding that happened for CHIP so that children can have health insurance. You were able to get funding for the military, which obviously is so critical. For someone like me, who is the youngest brother of a sergeant first class in the Army, it's obviously critical what we do for our military all across the country.
That's clearly the area of broad agreement. But the argument is that, so do you think Democrats would have been, just looking at it from a distance, if you can, do you think Democrats would have had to vote for that military funding even if the rest of it wasn't thrown into this bill?
We can't focus on the hypotheticals. When I was in the White House from 2009 to 2011, we would have to assess things as they came forward. And what came forward was an opportunity for us to continue to stand up with our respective communities. Now, let's also be clear that last night and the last 48 hours is another reminder of the dysfunction that's happening in Washington with the Republican leadership. The only reason why a shutdown happened on yesterday is because of Senator Rand Paul. That said, funding that happened for Puerto Rico to make sure that we give opportunities for those communities that are still struggling, making sure that we're able to, again, help our children, standing up for our military and veterans. Now let's move forward and making sure we don't forget the responsibility that has to not happen for our dreamers. We heard Senator McConnell say that a vote will come forward. We have not had that clear enough vision that's come from Speaker Ryan. So that's the responsibility that now we have to have in this manner right now.
Can there ever be a discussion about cutting or maybe saying to the agencies in the United States government, everybody's got to cut 3%?
Martha, absolutely. You can focus on that. Look, in New York, in our assembly, we have a 2% spending cap that happens in our budget.
Why not?
So there's ways you can focus on addressing it that way.
We didn't hear a whiff of that idea, Nat.
Not at all.
We increased government spending by 13%. And we're not even, Martha, having a conversation again about, do we really need 2 million federal government employees that we spend $136 billion on every year? Do we need the over 430 departments, agencies, and sub-agencies? And
it's not even on the table.
It's not even on the table, and I think Republicans squandered an opportunity to have that debate and say we need to be responsible moving forward and how we're actually spending, oh, by the way, the American taxpayers' dollars. We're the ones that get to foot the bill, as do our future children and grandchildren.
It's pretty easy to make an agreement when everybody pretty much gets what they want.
That's right.
And you shake on it and you spend a whole lot more money. Thanks, you guys. Good to hear from both of you. Thank you very much. So get this, on a trip to her local store, she picked up a few things and a lot